been able to attend. So I would like to welcome everybody today on the 7th of December to our session on personal safety. And we're really thrilled to be able to run this for you because it's such an important topic and there are many, many things in the news about it currently, aren't there? I'm Jenny Pelling. I'm the Apprenticeship Partnerships Director for Kaplan and I work on our personal development curriculum. And for me, this feels a really important topic that we're covering together today on this matter. And it will be run by Miranda Smythe, who is one of Kaplan's personal and professional development tutors and may have worked with some of you in the past on development sessions. And Miranda is a trained speaker and trainer on the subject of personal safety through the Susie Lamplugh Trust, which is a really important, one of the very first charities focusing on this subject. I'm sure Miranda will talk to us about that shortly. So welcome, we're an informal session. The microphones will be enabled and there's the opportunity to put questions in the chat, which we'll monitor as we go through. So please do take this as an opportunity to ask questions and have a conversation as well. Miranda, with pleasure, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. And yes, I do recognise some of our learners this afternoon. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Jenny mentioned that this is a really important topic. I think there have been several very major high-profile incidents recently that probably have made the boldest of us in the room stop and think a little bit more about our personal safety. So in the 3/4 of an hour that we have here together this afternoon, just wanted to take a really practical look at this in terms of taking responsibility for our own safety, managing our environment, doing some preparation and planning, and all of the different activities, particularly at this time of year, we should be free and safe to enjoy. I gather we're going to be circulating a copy of the slides. Please take notes if it helps you to learn. If you prefer to listen and look a little bit later on, that's an absolute pleasure too. And as Jenny mentioned, ask questions, make comments. It'd be lovely to hear from you and make it as an interactive as possible. So we've got till 1:45, so we've got 45 minutes. And just to run you through a little bit of our agenda for today in terms of what we're going to be covering, just to walk you through the main points. We're going to start off just very quickly talking about some of the principles of personal safety, just a couple of things to mention before we get started. Then to talk a little bit about using mobile phones and technology. Like to kind of bust a myth really that mobiles keep us safe, but also to look at using mobiles in emergency situations too, because it's probably one of the things most of us are likely to have with us. As it's Christmas and a lot of us may be leaving our houses for the first time in many months, thought we'd talk about being out and about. As part of this, we'll talk about going out for evenings out, but also using hackney carriages and taxis and learning the difference between both of them. So we'll talk about, as I say, taxis and also public transport. Drinking safely in clubs and pubs. Again, many of us might be taking this opportunity to go out and let our hair down a bit and have a bit of fun, but talk about how we do that safely. And then just finally, we'd be incomplete if we just didn't talk a little bit about social media and what information we share online. So that's kind of our agenda for our overview for this afternoon. I was just wondering what sounded most useful. Are there any thoughts? And feel free to pop them in the chat if you prefer. Any thoughts before we get started?
I'd love to see some people as well. So if you've got the ability to put your camera on, it'd be great too.
So what sounds most useful from that?
I think now that we're getting back out to some type of normality, not that we ever really will have normality now, I don't think. It's good to know how to actually stay safe, because you do hear so many different things happening, especially my younger siblings, relatives who are going out clubbing. You know, staying safe in clubs, I think, is really, really good to know about as well.
Definitely. Thanks, Leslie, for that. Anybody else, anything that strikes you as sounding most useful?
There's a comment from Will about aspects of sharing information on social media. That's a good
Lovely
topic.
It is. Hang on to that, because we'll come to that towards the end. Thank you. Anything else that anybody would like to say before we get started? So can I just ask you, do you think about your safety? Hannah's just mentioned public transport. Do you actually actively think about your personal safety? No, Hannah's saying not. It's very interesting. It's usually when something happens that all of a sudden, if a person feels vulnerable, it makes them kind of sit up and think, or they hear something on the news. In fact, you know, when we talk about stranger attacks, they are incredibly rare, but inevitably they hit the headlines, and they hit the headlines in a very, very big way. But I think all of us do need to take responsibility for what we do. And what I thought we'd do first of all this afternoon is to talk a little bit about general principles of personal safety. Now, the first thing I wanted to mention is something called early choices. And I don't know if you've come across this idea before, but early choices are things that you do early on that can help keep you safe later on. I'll give you some examples. They're never exciting, but they're always useful. Things like making sure that you keep money back for a taxi. So if you miss your last train or bus, you know you're guaranteed to get home safely. Charging your mobile phone, and we'll talk about mobile phones next. Telling people where you're going and what time you can be expected to be back. Sometimes things like packing a pair of flip-flops or shoes that you can walk more easily in. They're things that you do early on that can help you later on. I think a lot of people who are involved in situations often use phrases like "I wish I had" or "if only I had." And this is about kind of working out what those early choices actually are. The second thing is routine. Routine, I think some of us love routine, but in terms of personal safety, routine is often described as the enemy of personal safety. And it's good to shake it up a little bit so that our routine is known and visible to others. Traceability I mentioned, and that's about really somebody should know where you are and roughly what time you'll be back. Jenny mentioned the Susie Lamplugh Trust a little bit earlier on, and I don't know if you remember any of you. It was some of you maybe weren't around at the time, but it was nearly 30 years ago that an estate agent called Susie Lamplugh showed somebody around a house in London and just disappeared. She was just never seen of again. And one of the biggest issues was traceability, that you know her firm had no way of ringing back at the end of the day to say it was her last appointment. So nobody really knew until a lot later on that there was an issue. And that's what we mean by traceability. And the fourth thing is gut feel, your instincts. We call it gut feel because often it happens in our tummy. And that is saying, you know, this doesn't feel right. I'm not really comfortable in this area of town. I don't like, you know, this person that I'm speaking to. I'm getting kind of, you know, feelings in my tummy about them. It just doesn't feel right. And when personal safety terms, we'll come to it a little bit later on, but gut feel is really important because your brain's telling you that something isn't really right. So these are kind of four things to think about early on. Now, as part of this, I did mention mobile phones. And one of the things I think people often say is, I'm safe, I've got my mobile phone with me. And I just wanted to kind of break that as a myth in a way, because having a mobile phone with you doesn't make you any safer. What it does is it changes the way that you can call for help, but it doesn't necessarily make you any safer. But I just wanted to go through a couple of things around mobile phones. We'll talk a little bit about them generally, and then I wanted to show you some ways of setting them up in case you need to use them in a difficult situation. So first things first, I've said this, they don't make you safe. In fact, you could argue that they can make you more vulnerable. Does anybody know how a mobile phone could make you more vulnerable? Feel free to pop it in the chat if you prefer.
Does it make you a bit more of a target if you've got an asset that someone might want? Yeah.
I think the new iPhone that's coming out is £1,300. And a lot of people say things like, you know, people steal my phone, they can't use it because it's got a face lock or a fingerprint lock on it, but they get broken up for parts. They're incredibly valuable. They're incredibly attractive.
Really interesting comment here from Will about using phones as a crutch. and neglect other safety measures. Really good observation.
It's a really good observation. Well done. And that's exactly what they can do. They distract us from our surroundings. You can drive past a bus stop really late at night and there's somebody on their own, and rather than kind of paying attention to their environment, they're drilled down watching something on YouTube. So they're a big distractor. I've kind of had to do a couple of emergency stops in the past for school children who've been texting and walked out into the middle of the road without really looking. So they're a big distractor. So the idea is, yeah, they're great. I love my mobile. I'm not anti-mobile. I want to be buried with mine. But they do in some ways create problems for us. So take care with how and when you use your mobile phone. And as I say, take time to set it up for emergency use. And I just wanted to go through some principles of setting up your mobile phone, because both Android and Apple have some really good functions, and there are other things that you can do in terms of learning some different numbers maybe to make use of. So let's go through using your mobile phone. First things first, if in a difficult situation you wanted to contact somebody quickly, then one of the things that you do is to put their names at the top of your telephone address book in your contacts. And the way that you do this is by putting AAA in front of somebody's name, like taxi companies used to do when we had yellow pages. When everybody looked at the taxi, they would be first because they put AAA, so they automatically appear at the top of our list. Some of you may have already done this, but have you heard of ICE? In case of an emergency, have any of you come across ICE?
Yes, I use that.
Yeah, well done, Leslie. This came about after the London bombings, when the emergency service were finding telephones, but they didn't know who they belonged to. So after this kind of initiative was rolled out. It stands for in case of emergency. And the whole idea is in your telephone mobile contacts, you'd put ICE 1 and the name of the person you'd want somebody to be contacted first and their number, ICE 2, ICE 3, ICE 4, ICE 5. And the whole idea is if you're separated from your phone, the emergency services can take your SIM card out of your phone, put it into a reader phone and be able to access your contact, your contacts in your address book. They can't do that if you've SIM locked your phone, but if it's just a screen lock, then they can make use of it. If something's making you anxious or worried, that you have a concern in terms of personal safety and you just want to ask for some advice and guidance, then 101 is your non-emergency police number. You'd never use it in emergency because they take about half an hour to answer. But if there's something that's concerning you, a person maybe whose behavior is making you anxious, if you want some advice and guidance, then 101 is your number to ring. It's a national number, but it's a regional service. Now, if you're on your mobile and there's some sort of major problem, so you want to contact the police in an emergency, from a mobile, you'd always dial 112. From a landline, you can dial 112, but you'd usually dial 999. Does anybody know why you'd use 112 from a mobile rather than 999? Have you come across this before, any of you?
Being able to tell where you are. So if you ring 999 based on where your sort of incoming number would have an area code, maybe. Is that what?
Yeah, well done. And Marina's saying something similar as well. You're absolutely right. The main reason is because 112 is faster. If you dial 999 and you're on Virgin, for example, your phone will hunt for Virgin signal. If it can't get a Virgin signal, then it will hunt for the next strongest signal to hop on the back of. But if you dial 112, your phone goes to immediately the strongest signal. And because your phone's pinging off a number of different cell towers, it gives a better fix. So it doesn't give a GPS fix as such, but it gives a cellular fix as to where your telephone is actually calling from. So if you're using your mobile phone, it's always 112. I think a lot of us, I've just mentioned 111. Many of us might have used it over the last few months, but this last one, I'm not sure if you've come across before. Some people call it the silent plea. Some people call it silent solution. Have you come across this before, any of you? It's not terribly well publicized.
No, I haven't.
Haven't you? No. Basically, I don't know if you're aware of this, but every day in the UK, there are 20,000 dead telephone calls to the 999 number. 20,000. And it's a bit of a myth that if you don't say anything, they'll trace your phone and send an emergency vehicle. They just don't do that. So unless the operator hears that there's something happening in the background, basically then nothing will happen. But if you're in a position where you can't talk, you can dial 999 or 112. And when the operator answers, if you tap 55 on your keypad, it means I have a problem, I can't talk. And then the operator can say things like, if you're in a dangerous situation, can you press number 2? So it's a way of being able to talk to the emergency services in a situation where you can't verbally speak. So Hannah, yes, it's absolutely after the answer. So you dial 999 or 112. When the operator answers, then you'd hit 55. So it's called the silent solution or the silent plea, and it means I need help and I can't talk. And it's the sort of thing that you may never even need to use, but I don't know if it hurts to be aware of it. So those are some useful numbers. Would anybody like to comment on those before we just look at some other use of technology?
I think that's really useful information. I've certainly not had no idea about the 99955, but that's really good to know. Thank you.
It's probably one of the best kept secrets, really, that shouldn't be. So share it around, tell other folk too. By the way, did you also know that you can text the emergency services on 999?
No, I didn't know that.
Yes, you can, and 112, but you have to set it up beforehand. What you do is you text 999 and put register into your text message. You can do the same with 112. You only have to do it once. It will register you both times, whichever one you choose. So 999 into a text message number with the word register. They write back and say, do you want to register for text help? And you write back and say yes. So you have to set it up in advance. But again, I don't think many people have picked up on that. So there you go. This might be something to do after today. This is nice and fresh. Just quickly, whilst we're talking about mobile technology, the other thing I wanted to mention is that there are a wealth now of safety apps that you can make use of. But I think I'd like to kind of mention what Will said earlier on, that these don't replace really good quality personal care of our own safety. But there are 4, I think, probably the main ones that people tend to talk about. Kaplan's not affiliated with any of these, I mentioned that, but they're really good quality apps. Do you know any of these?
What 3 words is a good one?
Yeah. Does anybody use any of the others? You heard of them? Because as I say, there are quite a few, and if this kind of perks your interest, then it might be worth just spending a little bit of time looking at Play Store or at the Apple App Store and seeing what's available. All of these have free versions. They have paid for versions to accept what 3 words, which is just free in the public domain. So first of all, Life 360 is a really useful app when you want to get into what's called a circle with somebody else. Basically, what you do is you download it from whatever app store you're going to make use of, and then you create your own profile. So you put your name and your name that you'd like to be known by, your address, etc. You create a profile, and then what you do is make sure that your device's location is working, because it's GPS based and won't work without that. And then you can invite people to join your circle. And then once people have clicked on that link and joined your circle, you can then track, check in, send alerts. It's one of those apps I think would be hugely open to abuse in certain relationships, but in terms of being able to trace it, it's really useful. So that's Life 360. A lot of people use it when they're lone working. There is a paid for version, but actually the free version works really well. I found the only downside is getting a message saying Blue Water's nowhere near Cambridge. So that can be the only problem with it, is if you've got your device's location and people in your circle, they can actually see where you are. What Three Words is gathering quite a lot of attention. It's been around for quite some time now, but they're starting to advertise on television. I think Jennifer said that you've heard of this too. A lot of the roadside rescue services make use of it. In fact, somebody I know blew a tire on a country lane, and the road recovery company said, "Oh, can you download What Three Words?" It's a fascinating bit of tech. It's developed by a company in Cambridge. And what they've done is they've turned anywhere into the world into a 3 square meter block, which is represented by 3 words. So you have a play with this. It's quite fun to play with. Once you've downloaded the app, all you do is ask it where you are, and it will turn it into 3 words. So this person here is down salad hunter. They would give that to the emergency services. They'd put that into their computer at that end, and it would give a 3 meter wide fix in terms of where they are. So every location in the world has got its own individual identity. So as I say, it's starting to be talked about more and more and used and advertised. So that's What Three Words. Just finally, two apps that do very similar things. This is Be Safe. Be Safe basically is a way of interacting with others. What you can do is you can send people an SOS, you can do a fake telephone call, so you can make your phone ring, you can do Follow Me, so you can get a phone to your friends to track you on your way back from somewhere. So it's got quite a lot of features associated with it. It's actually very similar to Hollyguard, which is quite new but very, very popular. A lot of school aged children, but also some adults are making use of it too. And this is for all of us. All of us shouldn't hesitate to make use of these if they're useful. But one of the things that things like Be Safe and Hollyguard can do is, if you haven't reached somewhere by the time that you say that you're due to be somewhere, then it alerts people who are effectively in your circle. So what do you think? Are there any kind of comments on the way that technology is influencing personal safety and traceability? Is anybody going to have a look and a bit of a download later on?
I will, certainly.
Are you? Which one appeals, Jenny?
Actually, the Life 360 and What Three Words.
Yeah, a lot of families use Life 360 as well. Now, just finally, before we look at situations and safety, because we've just been talking about tech, I just wanted to mention personal alarms. And I'm just wondering, does anybody have a personal alarm? They can look like this, lots of different styles and lots of different versions of them. I think they used to be known as rape alarms, but they're really personal alarms. They're for men and they are for women too. Basically, they're devices that are designed to discombobulate somebody. Isn't that a lovely word? Don't get to say that every day. You can buy different sort of versions of them. You can get aerosol version ones and battery ones. You can even get one that masks as a watch. If you're going to get one, they're about £8 or £9. Get a really loud one. You want one that rings at about, or shrieks at about 140 decibels, which I don't know how loud you know that is, but if I kind of set one of these off now, your ears would ring for a couple of days afterwards. They're really, really loud. And the whole idea is, Sophie says she's got one in an old handbag somewhere, is that you have them in your coat pocket, or you maybe have one on your belt if you get one with a little string here where you just pull that and the alarm comes away. And the idea is that in a difficult situation, if you want to basically head off a problem, you set your alarm off and it confuses the other person. It'll make you jump as well. They are just so loud. But in that time of confusion, that is your golden time. So they can work really, really well. And I'd very, very much recommend, if you haven't got yourself a personal alarm, you do so. And so if you maybe look at the bottom of your handbag, put some fresh batteries in, and take it with you when you go out. Sometimes the police give them away, actually. It's always worth a quick call to your local police station. Sometimes they have initiatives and give them out for free. Oh, Sophie's was given by the police. That's interesting. I thought they stopped doing that, but apparently they are still doing it in some areas.
It's quite a while ago. They were doing some sort of tour of nightclubs and things at the time when I was working in one. So giving them out.
Yeah, well done. I'd dig it out if I were you, put some new batteries in it and just...
Well, I never leave the house at the moment.
So there you go. There you go. So we're going to come on now to talk a little bit more about sort of situational personal safety. And I thought we'd start off by talking a little bit about gut feel. So have you ever, without naming names, have you ever had an instinct about a person? Have you ever had a feeling that something wasn't right?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you say again?
Absolutely. It's definitely happened.
Yeah. Do all of you have a sense of instinct, gut feel about situations?
Yep, definitely.
Do you? Yeah. What's going on there? What is gut feel?
Like caveman instinct, doesn't it? When you sort of something triggers a fear response.
Absolutely, it's really primal. It's part of your brain that's associated with comparing where you are to what's happened in the past. And when your brain senses that something in the past has caused you problems, it will give you lots of biofeedback. Unfortunately, gut instinct, although you can't rely on it, is very powerful and should always be listened to. Sometimes our brain takes shortcuts. And sometimes it bases its judgment on out-of-date information, but you should always listen to it. Gut feels really interesting because it's different for all of us, but we often say, trust your gut. If it tells you that something feels wrong, it's usually because it is. So pay really good quality attention before dismissing it. We call it gut feel because for many of us, do you feel it in your tummy, any of you? Yeah, a lot of people do, but it's also associated with things like sharpening of senses. For example, have you ever woken up in the night and thought that the dressing gown on the back of the door was a person? You've heard a noise in the night, and all of your senses go into overdrive. So what happens with gut feel generally is very, very similar. The whole of us tenses up, our vision gets sharper, our hearing perks up, our muscles tense, ready for action. It really is, as you said, a primal instinct. But a lot of us feel it in the tummy. Some people feel sick, some people get tension. A lot of that is associated with oxygen deprivation, because one of the things that happens is our body goes into an emergency situation where we get cold hands, and that's the blood moving away from the surface of the skin to ensure that our vital organs are bloodied and oxygenated. Changes in breathing as well, which is where the oxygen deprivation comes from the surface of the lining of the stomach, and also an increased heart rate. So if you're getting all of these signals, you really do need to listen to them. I've debriefed quite a few people who've been involved in difficult situations, and a lot of the time people will say things, I knew it didn't feel right. I knew from the beginning that this wasn't right. I got the heebie-jeebies, and people talk about this, but as adults, I think one of the things that we often do is we negotiate it. And I think with gut feel, you don't negotiate it. You remove yourself from that situation and you work out a little bit later what's been going on. So as I say, you don't negotiate gut feel. Is there anything you'd like to say on gut feel before we talk about being out and about?
Just how significant that is, Miranda, to give prominence to gut feel and credence to it. And I love the phrase, don't negotiate with gut feel.
Thank you. I made that up.
Very good.
Yeah, it's good. It is good. And I think, Marina was just talking about people trying to break in, which I know is sort of very rare, but again, that kind of instinctive reaction we get is very, very similar to what we experience with gut feel. But we do need to give ourselves permission to tune into it, and we should use that when we're out and about too, which is what we're going to come and look at now. So will any of you be around and about on foot over the next few weeks? Are you planning any forays out into town centres?
Yes, we have our team meeting tomorrow in Birmingham.
Oh, do you? Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else planning to be out and about? Because I think all of us
to avoid town centres in December, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a good time of year to be talking about this really. So I wanted to just go through some tips and techniques. Marina's mentioned about Christmas shopping weekends too, so this relates to all of us all year round. But I think sometimes with nights drawing in, it can make territory feel very different in the same way as, I don't know, have you ever been the last person in your office at night? When everybody's gone home, how different it can
quite often, yes.
Yeah. Do you relate to that? It just feels so
Even just walking back to the car, even if it's in a car park at the building, it's not very nice.
I always recommend that if people park a distance away before the nights go, draw in, that you move your car closer as people start to leave, so you don't have so far to walk at the end of the day. But in general terms, just walking around, a lot of this, you could argue it's common sense, but Voltaire said there's nothing common about sense. So forgive me if this sounds very familiar, but there are a couple of things maybe that we haven't really considered. The first thing is what looks good in a busy town during daylight hours might not feel the same as nightfall comes. So, in daytime, but also evenings, choose your route. Sometimes it's worth walking the long way round just to avoid little sort of isolated shortcuts in areas where you feel less certain and less comfortable. The other thing is just to wear things that you can move comfortably in. I mentioned earlier on, a lot of people when they go clubbing take flat shoes, don't they, for the end of the evening. Just wear things that you can move comfortably around in. And when you walk with confidence. There was a council up in the north of England a couple of years that was teaching its senior citizens to walk with assurance and confidence. They had some research, I'm not quite sure the root of that research, that suggested that people were much more likely to be vulnerable when they look really confident and assured. So in the cobbled street that you see in the picture at the top in the dark, if that was not, if it was not vehicleized, if there weren't vehicles on it, you probably choose to walk right down the middle of that really confidently. Do take care about being on your phone when you're walking about. Your hearing is a primary sense of one of your safety senses, and basically what you're doing is stripping it away. I think sometimes if people feel a little bit lacking in confidence, they'll make a phone call to a friend. It's actually not a great strategy because your friend can't do anything to help you. You're much better off concentrating on your environment and making proper decisions without being distracted by something else. If you want to stop and make a phone call, stop with your back to something solid. That way, at least you can monitor what's happening around you. If you've got a shoulder bag, sling it over your shoulder, or carry everything in your left-hand side, which is the left-hand side is the one away from the road. I think in London particularly, there have been quite a few moped thefts over the last couple of years. Moped riders just coming along, grabbing bags and phones, etc. So anything important over your left-hand side. You can secure your wallet into an internal pocket, maybe use the safety pin to do that, which is a great way of avoiding pickpockets. And if you think that you are being followed, take care not to do what they do in the movies. I don't know if you've seen a film where somebody leaves a really well-populated town centre because they're being followed. They end up in the middle of nowhere at the top of a multi-storey car park. You have to kind of fight your instincts to go high and go dark, which is a primal survival technique. And what this means is deliberately, maybe crossover, go for somewhere really busy. And in a lot of bars and clubs, if you go into them, one of the things that you can do is ask for Angela. I'll come to that in just a moment. Don't know if you've heard of the Ask for Angela initiative, but I'll come back to that in just a second. So those are just some quick thoughts about walking. What I thought we might do now is very quickly talk about cycling, looking at also public transport and then taxis and hackney carriages. So very quickly, are any of you cyclists? I'm not sure we are. I'm going to whiz through something then in favour of moving on to something that sounds a little bit more useful. There we go. So just basically, if you are cycling, a lot of good advice here. Put some lights on. A number of cyclists without lights or reflective things. Again, avoid using your phone and texting. Cyclists are incredibly talented to be able to do that, but it's not good practice. And of course, if you're going to be locking your bike up, make sure that you've got a good padlock. But let's leave that in favour of things like public transport. So who uses public transport? Jenny? Yeah. Anybody else? Buses, trains, trams, planes?
Yes.
Do you? What do you use, Hasana?
Buses to go to town sometimes.
Yeah. Good. Anybody use trains? Yep. Okay, I can see a few of us do. So just a couple of things. The first one sounds really obvious, but we can get caught out, particularly at the moment with so many changes and drivers not being available. Make sure that you check timetables in real times. It's good practice to always keep money back for a taxi. So if there is a problem, you know that you can get home safely. A lot of taxis now are called through apps or take credit cards or debit cards, which is good news. If the station or the bus stop isn't particularly well lit, without losing your opportunity to climb on the train or the bus, perhaps just move to a really well lit area. It can just feel a lot more comfortable to be in the light. When you get on a bus particularly, and on trains too, try to sit as near to the driver as you can. That way, if you do have a problem, you can call attention. And on trains particularly, and buses too, but in trains you can move carriages, do be prepared to move. If something's or someone's making you feel uncomfortable, be prepared to move. I remember a couple of years ago coming back from London on what was nearly the last train. A chap in the compartment I was in had the scene from Psycho where the knife goes through the shower curtain as his text message tone, and it was very disconcerting. So I definitely choose to move carriages, as did a couple of other lone passengers. So be prepared to move, and also, you know, if you're down looking at your phone all the time, you're not monitoring your environment, and certainly there are lots of mobile phone thefts that occur when somebody's on their phone and they're near the door. A thief just grabs the phone as the doors are closing. So, you know, really manage your environment. If you're looking at your phone, you're not managing your environment. So we'll come back to hackney carriages in taxis in just a moment. But before we do that, I just very, very quickly wanted to run through some ideas associated with going out, particularly at this time of year, but all year round. So are any of you planning any pubs, clubs, evenings? So let's just go through some tips and techniques. First things first, there can be safety in numbers. So if you go out as a group, you need to talk about beforehand what your process is, whether you're going to stay together, if you get separated from each other, where you're going to meet up. So that's what we call those early choices. It's good to know before you go out how you're going to get back. So before you even go out, think about how you're going to get home. I mentioned about keeping things back for a taxi. So if you absolutely needed to, you know, you can get back safely. One thing that a lot of people do is between alcoholic drinks have a glass of water just to stabilize. It's difficult to manage your own environment if you're not cognizant of your environment. So spreading out alcohol and water can work really, really well. It can be cheaper too. Again, clubs and pubs are known for having dodgy drugs and can sometimes be associated with drug environments. So be very, very cautious. You just kind of never know really what's in anything that you could buy in an uncertain environment. Also, just be a little bit careful about strangers who seem very keen to buy you drinks. Again, just use your instincts here. If somebody feels a little bit pushy, then you might want to think, you know, what's the motivation here. I mentioned very quickly before, ask for Angela. You'll know usually if the pub or club has signed up to the initiative, because in the loo door, usually it would say, if you need help, ask for Angela. And the idea behind this is if you have a problem, you just go to a member of the bar staff and say, please may I speak to Angela? And that is coded words for, I've got a problem and I need some help. And that's for men and for women too. So it's a nice piece of coded language. And of course, if you're out and about, keep your eye on your drink at all times. Just really don't leave it for a moment on its own. And some of you might have seen drink lids that you can buy. Have you seen any of these? The idea is it makes it much harder for somebody to kind of slip something into somebody's drink. It doesn't happen that often, but it can happen. So definitely look after your drink. Maybe invest in one of these. I think they're about £2 or £3 each. So I'll just leave that thought with you. Sounds like some of us aren't clubbers, but if you are, then maybe there's some good advice for you. Now, just very quickly, before we come on to talking about being safe online and social media, just wanted to explain the difference between a taxi and a minicab. If anybody wants to explain this, please pop it into the chat. That'd be really lovely to hear from you. But we've got two vehicles that seem to do the same thing, but actually are very different. And in terms of personal safety, particularly getting home from somewhere maybe late at night, it's really important that you're aware of the difference between them. So let's just have a little bit of a look at this and see how it works. So let's start with minicabs. Both taxis and minicabs must be licensed by the local authority, which means that the driver has undertaken some rigorous checks in terms of their background and history. Minicabs, particularly if we talk about them first, you can't hail them in the street. It's actually unlawful for them to pick up a passenger in the street as well. So don't hail a minicab from the street, because anybody who stops is more likely to be unlicensed, because they know if they get caught, they'll lose their license. And it's monitored on CCTV in areas where the council has cameras. Minicabs must be pre-booked by telephone or by using an app. So you never ever get into a minicab. If somebody says, do you want a minicab, and you haven't booked it, then you just don't get in, because you just don't know what you're getting into. When you book, some of the apps do this automatically for you. When you make a booking, ask what colour the cab will be, what make of car it will be, and its registration. So when it arrives, you can tie it up. You can also give your first name and make sure that the driver asks for you. So all of these nice little checks in place. You can ask to see the ID of the driver, and certainly one of the things that the car will have is a photographic driving license, and you need to just have a quick look at the license, look at the driver, and just make sure the two things marry together. But unlicensed minicabs are real problem. So there's some thoughts on these licensed but must be booked in advance minicabs. Now, taxis are different. Taxis can be held in the street. They're purpose-built vehicles, unlike minicabs, which can be anything, although some firms have consistent ones. There's one not far from us that has red cars with black bonnets, very identifiable, but taxis are purpose-built. They'll have an illuminated sign on the top saying taxi. And again, the same checks, although you can hail these on the streets, before you get into it, the driver will have ID, which you are well within your right to ask for. And also, again, there'll be a license. Just check that matches up with the driver before you get in. But they do two very different things, and it's really important that you know what you're doing. So are there any comments on that before? Just finally, we're going to talk very quickly about being safe online.
Sometimes in the past, when I've been with friends and I'm the first out of the taxi or the minicab, I take a picture of the photographic license just in case.
Yeah, I've heard people doing that, and it's not bad practice. Well done. Thank you, Leslie. Anybody else before we just very quickly start to wind down? So, being safe online. First of all, in terms of you, think very carefully about what you share. Once it's out there, you don't get it back. There are always cached versions of things. It's very difficult to get something back once it's in the public domain. So on social media, manage your privacy settings. It's amazing how many people on Facebook think that their privacy settings are really high, but actually they're not. So definitely after today, make sure the privacy settings are how you want them to be. If you're getting unsolicited messages from people who are making you uncomfortable, you block and report. I always recommend that you screenshot things as well, because often people can delete comments, but if you've got a screenshot of it, although it's not properly deleted, it's gone off your message board, you've still got a copy of it if you want to then take further action. And be really careful about what you upload in terms of images. I'm not talking about you hanging from your feet by the rafters after a night out. I'm talking about things that can really compromise your safety. Just very quickly, what do you know about this woman? What do you know about her? Innocent photos, but what does this tell you?
Everything. What a birth date is, where she goes out for a coffee or something,
Yeah.
where she stays.
Yeah.
She works from home, and where she goes to do her nails.
Absolutely. These seem very innocuous, but they're incredibly revealing. For example, property addresses can be reverse Google searched. Sometimes you can even find encoded data in photographs which tell you the GPS location where they were taken. You might not be able to see this, it's quite little, but she's got keyring with a Z on it. There aren't that many names that start with Z. So things that feel very innocent, then think very carefully about what you share. When people start to build it together, it can create pictures which you won't want necessarily somebody to create. So just a couple of things finally. Also, be aware of, I think we perhaps cottoned on to this about phishing scams, but they're getting cleverer and cleverer. I've had a couple of emails recently where I really had to look at it and think, do I click on that or don't I? They're getting very clever. So don't automatically click on a link without really looking at the address that it comes from. If you think you've been cloned, that your identity is being stolen, report it immediately. Don't wait for more evidence. Immediately talk to your bank, talk to the police, report it immediately before, if it has been stolen, you get into further problems. I think a lot of us are really bad at this. How many of you got the same password for everything? But if it gets cracked once, then it can be cracked for a lot of different websites. And when you're buying, look at the web address. You want to be buying from something that's got an S at the end, which means secure, or it's got a padlock. If you do buy big things online, if it's an unfamiliar store, and sometimes again, just check the web address. Sometimes you can have something that looks like Radley, but it isn't Radley. So it's a clone website. Be very careful before you buy. And where you can, for purchases over £100, use a credit card. Your right of recall is much better. Again, take care when opening attachments before you do that. Just have a little bit of a think about it. And just finally on this, do you ever Google yourself? Do a vanity search, see what comes up about you, because if there's anything on there that isn't right, then you need to talk about the web provider with the aim of getting that removed. Now I'm going to hand back to Jenny in just a moment, but before I do this, just a bit of information for you. Today we've talked about us and personal safety, but there's a really interesting community interest company called Alpha Vesta, which is related to spotting signs of domestic violence and abuse. So I just wanted to put that on the slide. So in case you want some further reading from here, to have a look at that website. So as I say, this has been about us, but in terms of other people's safety, there's some really interesting information there. So in a 45-minute slot, just some key points about personal safety. I will hand back to Jenny in just a second. Anything you found most useful from that as I do so? Jenny.
For me, it was that you can text the emergency services. I hadn't known that. And 99955 as well. But yeah, a really practical session. And that's what I'd like to say to you, Miranda, on behalf of all of us and our learners, our apprentices and staff, how valuable this has been, because we don't often give ourselves time to think about personal safety, and it is one of the most important topics. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to learn from you on this.
Pleasure. Thank you all for joining me too. If there's any questions anybody's got, I'm happy to stay on. I realise that some of you might need to go. Some nice feedback coming in the chat as well. Don't forget, we're going to get the slides to you too.
Yeah, and I'll have the recording too if anybody would like.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Jenny.
So I'm going to stop recording now and just wish everybody a very safe time over the holidays, and thank you so much for joining us on this session. And if you'd like to send me any feedback afterwards, then other sessions that you would like, please do so, and I'll put my name and number, email address in the chat now. For those of you that don't know me, welcome to hear any feedback and other sessions you'd like us to run on personal development. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much, all of you. Have a lovely, safe Christmas. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.